Good afternoon. This is our science salon for Kyushu University. It's actually our fourth one already. And today we have Associate Professor Prof Chapman from Eisner. It's an International Institute for, and it's a tricky one.
Carbon neutral energy research.
Exactly, that one. And so we're going to talk with Andrew. I'm Johan Lauwereyns. I've been hosting the last three. This is our fourth science salon, and we're going to continue the series next academic year, and then the science communicators are going to take over. So this is hopefully my last one. But so today I'm very happy to be able to talk to Andrew.
Likewise.
Right after Energy Week.
Yeah.
So there are many different sort of types of questions and topics that I want to sort of look at and talk with you.
Yep.
But sort of a very quick sort of situation, like how would you identify yourself as a researcher?
Oh wow, okay, that's a very broad question.
It's very good, yeah.
So, as Jan said, my name's Andrew, and I work here at Eisner, which is what we call our institute, and my role predominantly is energy analysis. So, as we move toward a carbon neutral future, the role of energy analysis is to pull in all the new technologies, all the new behaviors that people will have, the way that our cities are shaped, the ways that our systems are put together, to see which of the technologies we should be pursuing to achieve carbon neutrality. That's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it, but yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so basically it sounds, and actually this is one of the reasons we really wanted to talk with you, because with our series here, our Science Salon series, we try to introduce also Vision 2030, and we want to talk a little bit about Kyushu University, what kind of place it is, some kind of things we do. And so this Vision 2030 and the slogan, which I would try to sort of condition everybody to remember, is sort of driving social change with integrative knowledge. And so that's sort of the vision that was laid out by the university leadership. And with this idea of driving social change, try to be relevant for society, and to do so with integrative knowledge, we had actually sort of identified like three main research areas. And one of them is the carbon neutral energy and the energy research, because that's really one of the flagships, or maybe arguably the flagship for the university. And you're part of that.
Sure.
And I think also this is the first time we meet, so I haven't had a chance yet to really talk with you about your research. So this is all on the spot, improvised.
Yeah.
But my understanding from looking at your website, very beautiful website,
Thank you.
by the way. And so I think you're really doing that integrative knowledge. At least if I would, I don't know how you understand the term, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well. But for me, integrative knowledge would be something which is not quite generalist knowledge, and so not trying to cover a wide domain and do everything, and be maybe sort of spread too thin. But also not specialist in a traditional sort of, Japanese, old school research type of idea. And an integrative knowledge would be more about trying to make connections and trying to see like work issue-based, work with specific challenges, and then pull together the bits of knowledge that you want to use for that. So is that an idea of integrative knowledge that you could
Sure. I think,
connect
I wish that you had written the spiel for our website. Yeah, like one of the things we talk about, and I hope we'll drill down into some of the specific topics, is, integrative knowledge is, as you say, it's not traditional, it's not embedded in any, we are an engineering institute, but as I mentioned before we came on, economics is also what I teach, and so energy, economics, and behavior is the third wheel to that. And we usually summarize that as the people, systems, technology nexus. And so what the key thing is that systems, technology. And the reason, they don't necessarily need to be in that order, but what's very important is I think we all have a grasp on the new technologies that are coming down the pipeline. We see the solar panels on the roof, we see the wind turbines on the mountain, but we don't know why they're there. And the reason that they are there is because they're accessible to people. People can put them on their house. There's a benefit for them to do so, so they choose a certain behavior which then drives a certain technology, which then embeds a certain system. So that's that integrative stuff that you're talking about.
Right.
And so we like to really bring it back to the people side. So we are the
Yes.
social science, the social engineering side of this equation. And the technologies that people support the strongest will likely make up the bulk of what we see in the future.
Right.
So that's perhaps one example of integrative
Yeah, no,
knowledge.
that's great. Yeah, because that's basically, it's almost sort of bringing the opportunities sort of and making them visible to people when they're actually going about making decisions about what they're going to, or how they're going to organize their house or
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, great, excellent. So with the Vision 2030, we have this driving social change with integrative knowledge, and I think you're doing a little bit of that.
Sure.
And so maybe to get a bit of a sort of almost like a more concrete idea of the types of research that you do. I was wondering, maybe can you tell us a little bit about the Energy Week and maybe what you presented there, or what people in your lab presented there, or?
Absolutely. So this year's Energy Week for ICER in particular was quite specific.
Okay.
And the topic that we covered, which may not be as easily accessible at a forum like this, was hydrogen embrittlement.
Hydrogen embrittlement.
And so what that talks about is, a minute ago we talked about integrative knowledge and more from the general to the specific. Japan seems to be on a pathway towards a hydrogen economy. We think that we're seeing that. We see some hydrogen.
What's a hydrogen economy?
So a hydrogen economy, in very, very simple terms, says that we'll have another source of energy in our energy system in addition to electricity and natural gas, which are the two underpinning sources at the moment, to a third, which is hydrogen as an energy carrier. So think hydrogen vehicles, think hot water boiled from hydrogen, these kind of things. But one of the issues with hydrogen is that it
So why do you call it a hydrogen economy then, if hydrogen is one of the three?
It's because it's a new one that's coming in.
Okay.
So it's just adding that to the economy. The word hydrogen economy have been in the vernacular for a very long time.
Okay.
It's not something that we've brought up. It's just a word that's generally. Some people like hydrogen society.
Okay.
Some people just say hydrogen fuel. There are lots of ways to say it, but that's one of them. But one of the really difficult things about hydrogen is it attacks metals. It makes them crack, it makes them brittle, and then it escapes, and that's not good for anybody.
Right.
And so hydrogen embrittlement is a big topic in engineering at the moment that says if we're going to build infrastructure to carry hydrogen to our cars and to our houses, the pipes should last for 100 years.
Yes.
And so this is what a lot of our scientists were concerned about and discussing.
So you need to work with material scientists.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
good.
So I'm happy to talk about hydrogen embrittlement if you would like, but I think it might be of better value to the people who are listening to talk about, why would we pursue a hydrogen economy, or what does it mean?
Yeah. No, but maybe we want to talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I wonder, like, maybe to still think about how you make those connections. So you're not a material scientist.
Nope.
And you want to do this hydrogen embrittlement, and at some point you need to put together a team or do the research. So how do you go about that?
Okay, that's a really great question. In fact, the hydrogen economy or the hydrogen society is one of our topics in our lab. And what we do is we run what we call a global model of the hydrogen around the world, because we know that Japan won't work in isolation. Japan imports fuel, and that will also be the case, at least initially, for hydrogen. So what we look at around the world is how hydrogen is produced, how CO2 is avoided, how the imports work, and what the potential end uses are for this hydrogen. And one of the ways that we avoid issues such as hydrogen embrittlement is we apply some of the findings of our material scientists, is that we can blend other gases with hydrogen in the pipeline to stop the embrittlement. And in this case, simply injecting hydrogen up to a upper level into existing natural gas networks is actually one solution. So our model can accommodate different amounts of hydrogen by volume in the energy system. So we can actually carry it in the liquid in the natural gas pipeline, and we can have a shower or cook our dinner with the gas that's in the pipeline.
And so how far do you take this? Like, you do the research, do you go on to like bringing that as a solution to, how to, actually work out the grid?
So all of those things. So the first one is, what is the quantum of hydrogen that we might expect in the upper and lower bounds in the future energy system, and what is its contribution to carbon neutrality? They're the first questions. But the second question, coming to your point, is, okay, so then the model says the maximum amount of hydrogen vehicles that we might see is this quantity.
Yeah.
However, we know that unless people choose hydrogen vehicles over other options, that won't deploy. So then we take that result and the maximum bounds, and we look at fleet simulations, we look at end user preferences for why they choose certain vehicles. We ask people what would influence future vehicle choice, and then we apply that at a nationally representative level and then simulate for what the future fleet might look like.
Wow. So a fleet simulation is exactly that. So it's like, how people move.
Exactly. How many cars, how many buses, which of them are hydrogen, which of them are electric vehicles, what are the learning curves for the prices of these vehicles, what drives people's preference for these vehicles, what is the efficiency of the vehicles, these
So that's really sort of always moving between macro, micro economics.
And it's very complex, and the model is very complex and constantly growing to incorporate all of these modules. But yeah, with the advent of almost unlimited computing power, we've been able to reduce computational time significantly, and that's been very helpful for us too.
That's amazing. So it's interesting, like, how do you think about consumer preferences then? Do you think of them descriptively, like you say, this is what people want, so that's what we should give? Or do you think a little bit more prescriptively and normatively, is sort of like they said, you want people to do this, and how do you nudge them?
So kind of a hybrid of the two. Like the first one, descriptively, yes, in some cases. We usually approach people with different choice experiments. So for your next vehicle, what factors underpin your choice? We don't necessarily tell them that it's a hydrogen vehicle or another. We ask, what do you expect? And of course, people's personal preferences often are outside of the realm of the function of the vehicle. They're more based on the looks of the vehicle or the size of the vehicle. So we use
how do you do a choice? Because now you're getting onto my field.
Sure.
So how do you do a choice experiment?
Yep. So last year we had a visiting researcher in the lab from Jülich in Germany. And he came over and he looked at a number of factors. So first of all, he looked at where people lived and how their transportation experience was, so how close they were to local public transport routes, these kind of things, whether urban and rural. And then he went through the range of Japanese vehicles that are available in the fleet, and then used those as an analog for potential future electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles at the different price points along the learning curves, and looked at all of those different things and put together a very complex rotating comparative survey where we had option A versus option B, and then option B versus some variation of A iteratively, and came back with a response that looked at deploying out the fleet into the future. And then we were able to look at that and say, all right, this is within the realms of what we think the quanta of hydrogen could be that underpins that, and therefore it's realistic, or we need to shift the usage of the hydrogen from one to another.
Okay, so you're basically looking for the dynamic range of the choices, and then play in that range, and then try to nudge,
exactly. And we certainly, at this stage, we're not trying to encourage behavior, although I would like to talk about behavior and other issues in energy as we proceed. But yeah, with the car situation, one of the great things about hydrogen, it's a very flexible fuel.
Right.
The hydrogen is, if you have a certain quanta of hydrogen, the hydrogen doesn't mind how you use it. You can put it in the gas pipeline, you can put it in a car, you can store it in a tank. There are a number of things you can...
I like how you say that.
Yeah.
Hydrogen doesn't mind how you use it.
No, electricity is a little bit different, and batteries are a little bit different. They're all a little bit different temporally and spatially and all of these things. But hydrogen in that case is quite flexible. We can blend it with other fuels to burn for electricity. We can direct fire it for electricity. We can hide it in the gas pipe. There are a number of things we can do. And so that's why hydrogen's quite interesting. But the quanta that we estimate in those bands that we just described, that really does decide what those end users might look like in our model. And I think the only point that I wanted to add to what you said was it's quite modular. So the model itself stands alone, and then we can add on these choice experiments or these preferences or these behavior shifts as we go, which I think is a nice application for something that might be a bit more static.
It is flexible because it is modular. Yeah. That's amazing. That's good.
Quite neat,
So basically, shifting to the broader idea of hydrogen society.
Sure.
So, what is a hydrogen society, and how would you get there?
What is a hydrogen society? That's a huge question. So in Japan, what might a hydrogen society look like means that hydrogen starts to play the role of some of the fuels that we already use, and also displaces or precedes some of the storage options that we have. So at the moment, I think you may be familiar with things like the Tesla wall, where you put a battery in your house or something like this,
Sure.
and then you do it decentralized. And I certainly know that my hometown of Adelaide in South Australia had really bad storms, and wind turbines were broken and all this kind of thing. And their response was to lay down a really huge lithium-ion battery deployment as their storage option. So within 1 second, they can have backup, and then the wind and solar can be managed through this facility. One of the problems with batteries, for example, is that they don't store electricity for a long time well. They discharge over time. Hydrogen gives us seasonal storage. We can put it in a tank when we've got excess over a whole season, for example, summer when the solar is overproducing in a place like Kyushu, and then just use it all in winter. So it's really great. That has that flexibility. It adds a dimension that we didn't have with the batteries, and so that's why people are excited potentially about solar. Particularly about hydrogen. But I want to say we're not advocating for a hydrogen society. It's just an option among the many. So yeah, it's really more about that. So for Japan, seasonal storage, options around using the existing gas pipelines, and obviously transportation. That's a really big one. Yep.
And so you need to look at that fairly regional.
Yes.
So you'd say Japan is one region, or would you break it up further?
We break it up even further than that. So our global model has 82 nodes. Japan is 2 nodes, so we have the north and the south. Osaka and Tokyo are the names of the nodes, but they don't mean that. They mean the consumption for the northern and southern parts of Japan. And the reason for that too is there are actually 2 networks in Japan. A lot of people don't know that. It sounds like you do the 50 hertz and the 60 hertz. And so that's why we break that into 2. But a region like the US, for example, has 4 nodes. A region like China has 7 nodes. There are different numbers for different reasons based on spatial distributions of people, energy networks, those kind of things.
Yeah, amazing. And so so with your node, then you try to sort of work for the conditions, the local, regional conditions, and then try to see where do you put your effort?
Exactly that. So how much solar and wind can each of these regions hold? How much hydro can they hold? All of those things. What is the weather variability in these regions? All of those things. The population, the shift in population, the initial density of CO2 emissions, and then the future reduction based on those.
Can you give an example of like a difference between the Osaka node and the Tokyo node in terms of approach?
Yeah, sure. In terms of approach, not really, because the model optimizes based on economic and CO2 conditions, but the initial conditions of those nodes is different, specifically that the northern regions of Japan are colder. And there tends to be a higher kerosene use in the north, for example, for warming in the winter based on traditional fuel use and perhaps being more used to disasters and having fuel on hand, as opposed to the southern warmer regions don't really have that condition built in.
So there fewer earthquakes as well.
So exactly. And the other one would be specifically on the Japan Sea side and on the southern side of Japan, the solar irradiation is very, very different. So for example, the modern model wouldn't preference Hokkaido, for example, to deploy all the solar. It would put it in the sunnier regions, which would be the Chugoku region and the Kyushu regions, like that. And of course, the wind would be completely different, would be preferenced in the north and then in the Kyushu region. So the model is cognizant of these things.
Amazing. Yes. If you don't mind, I'm going to totally shift topic. I heard your hometown is Adelaide.
Yeah.
How do you get from Adelaide to Kyushu?
Yeah, interesting enough question, I guess. When I was in high school, I went to a high school that was an Asian magnet school. That was what they called them in those days, quite a few years ago now. But
so you were learning Japanese at high school?
So I went to high school. I hadn't learned Japanese up until then, but when I went to high school, we had a choice, Japanese and Indonesian. They were the 2 languages, being our closest Asian neighbors. And so that made a lot of sense. And I studied Japanese in high school for the first time. And I think in year 10 or year 11, which is like the first and second years of high school in Japan, I came to Japan for an exchange. And that began my interaction with Japan. And eventually that's how I got here.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, when or how did your interest in energy economics or energy science emerge?
Yeah, great question. So,
because I saw from your resume that you started with international relations.
Yes. Yep. So I did my undergraduate was in international relations at Flinders University in South Australia. And then my master degree in Adelaide. That's right. And then my master degree was in governance and public policy with a specialty in resource management. So we're getting a little bit closer to energy. And my master's at the University of Queensland. And then I shifted to Japan to do my PhD at Kyoto University in energy science.
Right.
And that was socio-environmental energy
By
science.
then you had already completely identified your interest in
so
energy
it was a
science
bit of a side effect of my work arrangement. So I worked in the Queensland government in the Clean Energy Office. That was my first job after my undergrad. Yeah, and so
you get with your international relations degree, you went straight into governance.
Into the government, yeah. So I went into the government and got jaded making policy. But yeah, one of the interesting things is being in Queensland as opposed to South Australia is Queensland is a coal state.
Right.
And in fact, they advertise the fact that there are 250 years of coal under the ground, and the approach is basically to sell coal to everybody.
Oh, wow. They're proud of it.
And having the Office of Clean Energy within the Department of Mines and Resources is almost quite cynical, but very, very interesting. And so there was a nascent attempt at renewables in Queensland, and that was my role. I was actually in charge of the solar feed-in tariff program in Queensland, and my PhD ended up being about the mistakes and learnings of the solar feed-in tariff program. So that was
good. I mean, you
nice
had very hands-on experience, and that can then bring you to the reflection critique and so on. Yeah, amazing. Yes. So, what is your lab like? So you're now professor at Kyushu University. I think you teach in economics?
That's correct. So the lab is quite unique in that, so my tenure is here in Eisner.
Okay.
And so my role is to research. The majority of my time is focused on research.
Okay.
But when we achieve tenure in Eisner, we are then associated with a graduate school.
Sure.
And so my graduate school coming out of energy economics in Kyoto University was economics. And so therefore I teach energy economics in the economics department to both undergrad and graduate students, but I don't have a ZEMI. So I don't have undergrads, but I take my graduate students, both master and doctor, from the economics department.
Okay, great.
So the doctors live here with me, and my postdocs on our projects live here, and then our master students have their own area in the economics department. And so I'm back and forth between those two. But yeah, typically speaking, so at the moment I think we have about 7 or 8 students all together in the graduate. So I think, actually the number is pretty even at the moment between doctors and master students. And their topics range. Of course, they're influenced by my background, which of course is energy and carbon neutrality.
Yes.
And so usually their research is based on, for example, I can give is compact cities, and CO2 reduction is one, so that links well with our topics. Another is the reforming of supply chains in the textile industry towards carbon reduction, these kind of things. So looking at life cycle analysis and multi-region input-output analysis, these kind of things, very economic based. Yeah, those kind of topics are the most common.
And so how do the students come to you? It's like, they find, how does that process work?
I guess they find me through the usual channels.
Because it sounds like they're doing very different projects.
Yeah.
So they come with their own proposals?
So yeah, one of the maybe unique things about Chapman Lab is that the students that we accept need to be self-starters. Okay, they need to be fairly independent in their research goals and their aims and what they want to achieve, and then we provide them the resources and the expertise to achieve those things. That's generally our approach. We don't tell people what to study, and we certainly don't take them by the hand and say, well, your senpai did this and therefore you should do that. That doesn't happen. We give them freedom, of course. They need to be
It's not that
shaped.
sort of master apprentice.
No, not at all. Not at all. I want them to extract the expertise from me that they can, but also have their own passion. Because once you get to the end of your PhD, then your life begins. So they need to be ready for that as well. And so yeah, that's kind of what the lab looks like. A lot of self-starters, but they find us through 2 pathways. One is of course the regular entrance examination pathway into the Japanese university. So we have some Japanese master and doctoral students who come through the economic systems school.
You mean from other Japanese universities?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they come into either the master or doctoral programs. And the other pathway that seems to be quite popular is what's called the international program in economics. And that means that they can do their coursework in English or Japanese.
G-Pro-E?
No, that's not G-Pro-E. That's for undergrads who want to go overseas.
Okay. Yes. No.
And so, yeah, I'm peripherally associated with that. But no, it's called the IPMA, which is the international program, it's the IP version of that.
Okay.
And there are several schools within that international program. And basically the students, similar to the MEXT intake, so the Monbuka Gakusho intake. And we also have MEXT students of course, as a lot of us do. And so they make an application through the international program. And the advantage for them is not only can they learn in Japanese if they want to, but the international program allows them to do their master coursework in English. So they can come to a Japanese university, learn Japanese and take Japanese courses, of course, but the core subjects are offered in English.
Of course, you teach your courses in English.
So I teach my courses both in English and Japanese.
Oh,
so
you do
to the
in
undergrads
Japanese
and the grads for the economics stream, I teach in Japanese, and for the international program, I teach in English.
Good.
So my students may take my courses, but they don't have to.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, amazing. That's good. So what, you mentioned one of the students was working on Compact City, and can you tell us a little bit more about that research project? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So compact cities is a phenomenon that you may be familiar with, especially in a place like Japan where we have this aging, shrinking population.
Yes.
And so basically as people get older, or not even when they're older, we don't want to be have urban sprawl. Right. We don't want people to have to travel long distances just to see the doctor, long distances to go to school. We want people to live in a compressed area closer to the city centre such that they can access services using just public transport or by walking or this kind of thing. So think maybe not like Itoshima around us, which is walking, riding a bicycle, and certainly owning a car is part of the lifestyle. Think more Tokyo, Osaka. These cities are trying to build smart hubs around maybe a central train station or a central area. And then we encourage people to live in this way and avoid urban sprawl. And what the overall goal of this specific research is to find out what are the levers to reducing CO2, carbon dioxide, in that scenario. And of course, that would be not owning a vehicle. It would be having people living in more dense residential, so they're not traveling so far, and having services available proximate to those areas. So it's about designing cities or retrofitting cities such that they do that. And the example in Japan at the moment is Toyama.
It's a really interesting approach. I think people don't really think about that. So it's a very sort of macro economic, urban development, urban engineering kind of approach to SDGs. But
it really is. And the link is direct, because it's not all good news. There are also some bad things, right? So if all the people live together, maybe we need to have more CO2 to bring them all the things that they need, or there are trade-offs, obviously. But the key of the research, as any practical research, is to identify the levers. What are the levers that drive reducing or increasing carbon dioxide and improving lifestyles?
That's great. And so how far do you go from research to policy making or making proposals, or where do you situate yourself in that arc?
So a PhD student may, by their final publication, get to the point of making a policy recommendation as the outcome of their paper, and then that may be, if well administered through our PR team here, that often gets picked up and talked about or reflected. I've noted over time, as we write more and more papers, especially in journals that dictate that we should have a policy implications section, is that often governments do pick those up. And not always just the Japanese government. Often other governments do. We see through our altmetrics that these are being picked up further afield than that, which is quite a satisfying thing.
Absolutely,
So the idea always is to get to the point where we can say this is practical, it's replicable, and it's generalizable, and therefore it does lead to policy recommendations. Absolutely.
So do you think, does it at all go to the point of industry collaborations or like entrepreneurship, ventures and things?
So typically speaking, the field that we're in, the energy economics field, that's not so common. It's usually research that we hope to generalize and then get towards government and community as our key stakeholders. But our lab has several industry collaborations separate to that as a result of being in ISNA. So the students not so much, but we have a couple of postdocs at the moment. They're working on specific both social and engineering issues that will be...
Can you give an example?
Absolutely, I can. So the ISNA itself has a research center called the Mitsui Chemicals Carbon Neutral Research Center, and they have several themes throughout ISNA and abroad: green hydrogen, carbon reduction, and also ours, which is what they call advanced analysis, because we're energy analysis. And we have two postdocs from Mitsui in our team. The first is looking at the social equity implications of product development and CO2 reduction and these other things. And the other is specifically looking at roadmaps to carbon neutrality in the chemical industry, but also more broadly. Yeah.
Yes. This word social equity, I was kind of
comes up quite often, right?
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my PhD was about social equity, the social equity implications of deploying renewables. And if we deploy different renewables in different ways, does that change people's lifestyles?
Right.
And social equity is very, in very few words, is how can we shrink the gap between rich and poor by doing something exogenous? And in this case, that might mean deploying renewables. It might mean, encouraging people to act in certain ways in line with their beliefs or their preferences. And so social equity is really about taking people's lifestyles from a certain level and improving those lifestyles while not stealing from someone else. So the idea is that everyone can be lifted up differently, but the gap between them is not increased, it is shrunk.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make, in a sense, a stable or a healthy society. It's ultimately, is about creating an environment that is conducive to,
Absolutely. So we're very, that's obviously my key research theme, my personal research theme. We've put a lot of effort into broadening that to beyond just energy and other things, but also looking at behaviors and these kind of things as well. Yeah.
And so can you give an example of behavior that you would say that connects to your sort of social equity research?
Absolutely. So one of the most exciting research topics that we're looking at the moment is how can we more accurately predict how people might act under certain conditions. And often, I want to bring you back to, I think I mentioned before, we take surveys and we do choice experiments and these kind of things. And often the questions we might ask someone is, how important is the environment to you? Are you concerned about climate change? These kind of general questions, and people will give us a response on a scale of 1 to something. And that's really great, but what we really want to know is what makes people think like that. And in the traditional statistical analysis, which we do a lot of, we look at things like people's income, their education, where they live, whether they're renting or owning their house. How old are they? Are they a man or a woman? These are often really influential in the way people value the environment. So one of the things that we're trying to do, one, to reduce the amount of questions that we have to ask people in surveys because it's quite onerous, it's quite expensive, and personal information is not something that people want to really give out voluntarily. And so what we're trying to do is use some machine learning approaches where we take common everyday behaviors and everyday preferences and try and link those with how people value the environment or how people want to respond to climate change or whether they're concerned about social equity or these kind of things, and look at how we can link those preferences without asking the deep questions. And some of the behaviors that we look at are things like, do people proactively use eco bags? Do people eat out a lot? Do they like to be in nature? These kind of what you might consider very general questions. They ask people, and we're actually finding that not only because we begin with statistical analysis to have a contrast or a baseline, we find that there really are some opportunities for machine learning that we can say, okay, if we know just a few things about you, how old you are, perhaps your sex is also quite important. There's a difference between how men and women value different things. And some of your behaviors, maybe just 3 or 4 questions. We can predict with a fairly good level of certainty how you might value the environment compared to your peers. And that's really quite a neat thing that we've been working on quite a lot this last couple of years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, and to talk back about the sort of the bands that you talked about dynamic range. So I imagine that based on such predictions, you could try to see like, okay, what is changeable? Where is the space to work?
Yeah, and it comes back to your first question. You said, is it descriptive, prescriptive, these kind of things. What we actually find is a lot of people want to do certain things. They want to use an eco bag. They want to conserve resources. They value water, or they value their time, or they value their family, or all these things. They're actually linked very strongly to other activities, and we can identify and encourage those just through reinforcing behaviour, or what some people call nudges. Where we can say perhaps you should think about this, or have you considered that? Or even just showing people what their behaviours mean in terms of aligning with their values.
Yes,
And I go, yeah,
exactly.
I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe this product is better for me, or maybe this activity is better for me, aligning with their own values. So we're not saying you should do this because it will reduce CO2. We say, actually, you're already interested in all of these things.
Yes.
This might fit.
Exactly, yeah. Because that's the biggest nudge usually.
It really is.
Just knowing what's out there, what the options are.
Yeah. So that's, we're doing quite a lot of work on that this year, and we're, hoping to take that further as we go and be able to visualize it, be able to use it to identify, as you said, those policy implications and how we can drive, reinforcing behaviors, absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Yes. Totally different question.
Go for it.
Ito campus is a very interesting environment. And sometimes it's called, I forgot how it was called at some point. It was like some kind of innovation platform or ecosystem or so. Do you see it like that? Are there any projects where you think of Ito campus as your little compact city where you want to do experiments? Or is that something you would want to work on?
I hadn't thought about it so much until you brought it up. I think one of the things that universities are in our research, which looks at broader systems, is students are a distinct group of people and they're not representative of the greater population. And so for us, that's often a starting point for our research, to check things like language, to check things like understandability, and get a snapshot of how we want to develop our survey instruments and these kind of things, but it's not directly applicable.
No,
so
that's true, it's not a good sample.
We often use it as a sandbox to begin with. But yeah, this campus is so unique in so many ways.
I mean, this is a totally silly, I probably shouldn't even say, but I get annoyed by all the kids who come to school by bus or by moped.
Sure.
I want them to ride bicycles.
Sure.
And so how can we get these 20,000 people who come to Ito campus, how can we get them to not just talk lip service about SDGs, but actually do that in their mobility?
It's a neat question. I'm not so annoyed by the kids who come by bus, because I think a bus is a good option compared to private transport.
But this bus company is like the Yakuza, right?
Yeah, I don't know that
they're monopolizing. They're increasing
the prices seem to go up quite a lot. No, I think that there are behaviours we can encourage, but I do take a lot of interest.
It's true. Bus
because
is definitely better than car.
Yeah, and I drive to work, so and because I live in the countryside, so that's my option. Basically, there is no bus service where I am. It's not certainly not far away, but
how far are you away?
I'm about 10 minutes by car, but I'm in the wrong direction.
Okay.
So there are no buses that come between us and the campus. But that's
you could ride your bike.
I could ride my bike if I wanted to ride alongside the trucks on the thin roads. It's not ideal. But I think you highlight a key point. Well, I want to say two things. The first thing is, I think we need to give it time.
Right.
I think we need to see the city build around the university, which will happen.
Because
we're already
it's still
seeing
a
it.
New campus,
it really is still brand new. And as you said, 20, 30,000 people in this middle of nowhere, Inoshishi and Cow area, and we're suddenly, saying, hey, everyone, ride your bike. It's not practical right now.
That's right.
Thankfully, those people who live in the train station nearby do have an excellent bike path, which is very safe. That's excellent. And the majority of people do live in that direction, so that's okay. But I think we're seeing more services pop up. We're seeing more things built around, and the density will follow. And so I think I'm excited for the future.
Like this compact city element is
so university cities typically do replicate those things. The convenience is there, the opportunity is there, and the services are there. So that's something that we should certainly look at in the next perhaps 5 to 10 years, because Corona really stagnated that. It really put a pin in a lot of businesses that were thinking about popping up. And just now we've seen Steyr come here with, Starbucks and all the rest of it, which is great. But now we need the more common things. We need the supermarkets. We need the accommodation. We need those kind of things to pop up too. And I think they will follow now that opportunity flows. The second thing that I wanted to say was, I think it's really neat that within the university, a lot of people are using it as a test bed. I see the rental scooters. I see that there were those, I don't know what you call them, because the rental scooters I'm talking about are like the motorbike style ones, but there was ones that you just stood on as well, which looked incredibly dangerous. But at least they saw that young people like new innovations, young people like to try new things, and therefore this is a good microcosm for them to use those things. And the other thing that we have in Fukuoka, and especially at Ito campus, is a strong link to hydrogen. So there's actually a hydrogen
Right.
refueling
Yes.
station in the university.
Yeah.
So that's the infrastructure that you wouldn't usually see
That's true.
in a place as remote as this is
Yes.
already happening here. So yeah, I think there's some hope. For our research,
agree.
not quite, but
It's-
in
yes.
terms of a test bed for further social issues and social evaluation, absolutely.
No?
Yep.
Great, yes. So you mentioned like 5-10 years
Yeah.
from now. If you think more about your work,
Yeah.
what do you want to be doing like 5-10 years?
What do I want to be
Years
doing
ago.
in 5 to 10 years? Wow, I don't know. It's a really interesting thought. I think we're at a real crossroads in terms of computational power and accessibility.
Right.
I talked about some machine learning a minute ago. I talked
Yes.
about our global hydrogen models that, 3 or 4 years ago would take a day to give an
Yes.
outcome, and now it's down to 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
And they're in PCs that are in our lab, workstations that we build ourselves. I think there's a real opportunity for us to leverage all of the new tools that are coming out, not so much ChatGPT and those kind of things,
Yeah.
but more about traditional programming, machine learning,
Yeah,
and
just
cluster
computational
computing,
modeling,
that kind of
yeah.
thing. Yeah, we have a critical advantage at this time that it's cheap. It's almost disposably cheap to implement these things on even the smaller budget that social sciences are endowed with. And yeah, we're really leveraging that now and seeing the initial fruits of that labor. I think in 5 or 10 years, that could be a really practical, almost immediate feedback system that people can interact directly with online
Yes.
or through their
Yeah.
telephone. We think that the mobile phone is probably the
almost
platform.
like you have precision medicine, you could have like precision energy science.
Yeah, we really see people using their mobile telephones and going to the store and just doing this and going,
Yes.
well, these are the things that align with your values. Why don't you consider those? Rather than, the traditional
Right.
looking at an eco label or reading
Exactly.
the ingredients.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Really
yes.
practicalizing those, interactions between people and
Yeah.
places. So that's maybe where I see myself.
Getting at the level of the microeconomics, sort
Yeah.
of the choice, the actual choices as they are being
Yeah,
made, and
in
then
real
having
time.
the opportunity
Yeah.
costs in
Yeah.
real time. Yeah,
That's
amazing.
where I'd like to be.
Yeah, wow. I think that's a great sort of final sort of
Absolutely.
observation.
Yeah.
So I think we should come to a close for our 4th Science Salon. Very exciting. Lots and lots of ideas. It's amazing. So
sure.
I want to say thank you,
Not
Andrew
at all.
Chapman.
Come and visit us anytime.
Great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Fantastic. Great.
Right. Thanks again.
You're doing lots of